I don't see a button. Oh, there. Yep. Awesome. Okay. I guess I will introduce myself. So I am Jeff Kramer. I work at HP Cloud. I used to be on the developer experience team, and now I'm working on new software platforms in the cloud. So the name of this talk is AI Netizens, the State of Agents Online. You have to come up with the name of your talk like 10 months before you actually give it. So, but we'll be talking about related things. So the hashtag for this talk is Botizens, if you would like to back channel. And I'll be posting the slides and everything after the fact. So the first time I failed the Turing test, I was in high school. I think I was a sophomore in high school. Back then we had BBSs. So I dialed up to a BBS and met somebody, and they were like, hey, come dial up my board, check it out. So one night I called up his board, and I got the little menu interface, and I was poking around seeing what stuff he had. And one of the options he had was chat with sysop. So I went in there, and it was like, hey. And I was like, how you doing? And he was like, cool. And I was like, so this is pretty neat. And he was like, yeah. And it went on like that for like a page and a half. And then I, finally realized that I was talking to a machine. So not great for me, kind of felt embarrassed. I'm sure he had logs of it and had a good laugh about that. But the experience was kind of compelling. It was, you were being fooled by a machine, but you were being fooled by a machine, which is kind of impressive. So we're going to talk about agents and bots today. They're kind of the same thing. They're kind of a little different. Agents, specifically intelligent agents, are sort of more our bailiwick today. So this is Nicholas Negroponte. He started the MIT Media Lab in the mid-'80s. And in his book, The Art of Human-Computer Interface Design, he wrote, speaking about sort of the idea of bots, wouldn't you really prefer to run your home and office life with a gaggle of well-trained butlers to answer the telephone, maids to make the hospital corners on your bed, secretaries to filter the world, accountants or brokers to manage your money, and on some occasions cooks, gardeners, and chauffeurs where there were too many guests, weeds, or cars on the road? So the idea of the computer doing stuff for you without you telling it explicitly to do stuff dates back to the 50s. John McCarthy was an early pioneer of this stuff. And Alan Kay, referring to John McCarthy in that 50s sort of era, said they had in view a system that, when given a goal, could carry out the details of the appropriate computer operations and could ask for and receive advice offered in human terms when it was stuck. An agent would be a soft robot living and doing its business within the computer world. And I saw a slide, I think it was yesterday or the day before, somebody was like, oh, we're going to have intelligent software bots, we're going to have AI in 5 years, and then 5 years later, oh, we'll have it in 10 years, and 10 years later, we'll have it in 20 years. But I think we're close to something interesting, so I'm going to talk about that today. So what is a bot? So bots, or intelligent agents, the things that define them, they usually have an environment that they can sense. They can take some action based on something that appears for them. And once they decide what to do with that based on their logic, they have actuators that they can use to enact change. Ideally, if we're talking intelligent agents or AI, they have a storage or learning mechanism so that they can get better over time. So we're going to talk a little bit about practical history. A lot of early bot development happened on the internet because the internet was the first place where you could sort of have a system that would communicate with lots of stuff. Otherwise, you just have a bot inside your computer, and that isn't very compelling. And bots really thrive in these larger ecosystems where you can give them more stuff to process. Particularly in the late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, we had text-based multi-user dungeons online. So in a dungeon, in a game like this, you would have a non-player character. You would have some sort of bot wandering around, and you could talk to it or you could fight it. And that sort of spawned a mini sort of Cambrian era of bot development. There's a really interesting sort of digression into this in Andrew Leonard's book, Bots, The Origin of a New Species. It was written in '97, but all this stuff happened before that. It's a pretty good read. The real arms race happened on IRC. Because on IRC, you could get an advantage if your bot was better. So in IRC, if you force an IRC node off of the rest of the group, you can try and take control over that channel. If you have a bot sitting in that channel, it can react at computer speed. So you had these bots that were developed to sort of sit on a channel and maintain control. And they would give out permissions to people and do things, and you could play games with them. And you really had this sort of ecosystem of development there. Egg drop, things like that you may have heard of. So that was the long ago. More recently, we have had this Cambrian explosion. Twitter is really great for bots because Twitter is essentially a message bus. So you put messages on it, you pull messages off, you can respond to people, and messages go to and from somebody sometimes. And what you can do is limited. So the reason that IRC works, the reason that MUDs work, is you're dealing with text. You're not dealing with a visual representation. You're not trying to fool somebody in the real world. And on Twitter, you're limited to 140 characters, so it's really hard to tell the difference between somebody badly typing 140 characters and a bot coming up with 140 characters. We're not really going to talk about like weaponized Twitter follower networks. A lot of those systems are sort of hydras where lots and lots of Twitter followers are run by one system, and that's not really an intelligent agent. We're sort of more interested in bot platforms for this discussion. Can you see that? Yeah, contrast got a lot better. So lots of people say that Google ruined the internet because Google monetized the link. And once you had links that were monetizable, you had people who wanted to put links everywhere so that they could gain monetary advantage. And a lot of this early stuff sort of happened in blog comment forums. And what's interesting there, yes, there were lots of bots that were written to spam comments, but once you throw things like CAPTCHA in, suddenly you have a war between the bots and the people running the blogs. And in CAPTCHA's case, it's really interesting because the bots end up harnessing people sometimes to defeat the CAPTCHA so the bot can continue its work. It's sort of an interesting idea of flipping the thing on its head. So what we have now, we have systems like Siri and Google Now. These are sort of our current, what we think of as bots. They sort of think on their own for us, or in the case of Siri, we talk to it and it does stuff for us. Which is great, and I'm sure they will develop over time. Unfortunately, these systems are sort of locked. They're bundled together. They're really pretty bundles, but they're bundles of stuff, and you can't make Siri any smarter on your own. Eventually, Apple may expose Siri connections to applications, so you can say, map this in this app, or send something with this, but for now, that hasn't happened yet. And it's still in sort of a tight, vertically enclosed system. There was a panel yesterday on AI and interfaces. And it's interesting because the people that were talking on those panels were talking about specific verticals. So it was like, we can create an AI bot that works for you in travel. Or the other thing they were talking about was entertainment, calendar. So we focus on a specific vertical. It's really hard to be a bot that's good for everything. It's really hard to create something like Jarvis, for instance. So that's sort of all the stuff that came before. William Gibson likes to set his books the year before they come out, so they can be futuristic but still realistic, and he doesn't have the pressure to come up with the next big thing. So we're going to talk about the now future, which is like stuff that was possible a year ago but hasn't necessarily been plugged together yet. So we're going to think about a social bot platform in this case, because I think that's a really interesting place that hasn't been explored yet. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was Weavrs. And if you've been in the bot sessions over the last couple of days, you've undoubtedly heard about Weavrs. Mr. David Balsola is here, the creator therein. Weavrs are a social tag-driven bot platform. So here's an example. So this is the first Weavr I created for myself. This is its blog. So you can see we have, it read a book in Google Books, looked at a picture in Flickr, it listened to some music in Last.fm, and this goes down the page. And it's doing stuff all the time in the background. It connects to Twitter, so I see when my bot updates in my Twitter feed. I've subscribed to that user. It has emotions. It says up at the top, I'm mostly happy. So if you want a good example of a Weavr, my wife created one named Clarissa. It is clarissa.weavrs, WAVRS.info. Clarissa comes up with some really interesting stuff. So when you create a Weavr, you define the Weavr with sort of general interest tags, like these are the things that define me. And this is Jeff Sim. Jeff Sim is sort of a shadow of me. Jeff Sim works where I used to work and lives at my house, and I see him commuting back and forth all the time. He's interested in some of the things that I'm interested in. And then you define emotions. You can define as many emotions as you want. So these are the things that generally make me happy. So these are the things that I told my Weavr that it would make him happy. So I'm not 100% sure about this. I haven't talked to David about this, but I think part of the magic behind Weavrs is that Weavrs goes out and trolls Twitter for similar words to the tags that you have defined and uses those to find other things. Good. Interestingly enough, your Weavr over time will develop its own emotional connections to things. I assume by taking those words and pairing them with new emotions. So my Weavr feels lost when he hits OSX. I feel that way sometimes. And he feels need when he sees muffins, and yeah, I can relate to that. You can delete these, but it's interesting to sort of let them go and see what kind of emotions they develop. So this is our inception slide. So this is David talking about Weavrs at Next in Berlin last year with a quote from me. So next time he talks about Weavrs, he can use a picture of me showing his slide. So Weavrs are really cool. David sort of designed them to be storytelling bots based on big data. Initially, commercial purpose was I can create a Weavr like someone or like a market segment and let them live in a place, and they'll come up with stuff. Like there was the Mila Kunis video from last week where the interviewer is interviewing her and he's sort of stumbling over his words and being very Hugh Grant charming. And Clarissa posted it like a week ago as well. So they have an interesting connection with what's going on in the zeitgeist. And David's working on some interesting stuff there. So you may look at that and you may be like, okay, well, that's interesting, but you know, how commercially viable is semi-autonomous internet and mobile things wandering around collecting stuff wandering around a world, making artistic judgments. So this game, specifically this game, sold 10 million units. They've sold 16.5 million units of the whole series. If you have a wife who has a DS, she may have a copy of this game. I've played it myself. So this is Animal Crossing. In Animal Crossing, you move into a little town on the edge of an ocean. And the town is populated with these animal friends you can go around and talk to. And the animal friends, you can give them things, and they'll be happy if you give them stuff. So you can go dig up dinosaur bones or whatever and give them to them, and they'll like you more as time goes on. They have things to say. You know, you'll wander back to them, and they'll be like, "Hey, did you hear about this other guy? Like, isn't he cool?" Or what have you. If they eventually get tired of you, they will say, "Oh, I'm going to move away." And through Nintendo's network connection, they can actually move to your friends' versions of Animal Crossing. And then they will send you email sometimes back from wherever they moved on to. I think there's a new one coming out for the 3DS soon. And one of the things, you can have a house in Animal Crossing, and you can invite your friends over. And they'll sort of give you visual feedback, like, "Oh, this really screams Haley to me. Wow, like this part of your house." So you know, there's something here. And we get really attached to friends. I mean, there are Wikipedia entries on there are wiki entries on how to keep friends from moving away. Because once you talk to it over a period of weeks or months, and you give it stuff, and you want it to like you, and you like it, you don't really want it to move away from your town. And you know, these things sort of have a personality. They have a visual look. They have, you know, one will be really tough, and he'll always be like, "Arr," or whatever. And you get attached to them because they're sort of distinct. And I think personality in bots, it's going to be a major thing, I think. Siri doesn't have much personality. When Siri has personality and says something clever, we really love it. We really like the idea of, you know, writers writing for Siri, so Siri can be more fun to talk to. So I think personality is going to be a big deal. Cory Doctorow does not necessarily agree with me. I talked to him about this a week ago. He thinks it may be kind of like celebrity voice mods for your GPS, like Homer Simpson is telling you where to drive. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I see his point. But he does think that the idea of a bot that is yours, that you control, that isn't that doesn't come with your phone, that isn't tied to Google, isn't tied to a service. There's, you know, inherent trustworthiness there that you don't get from Siri or from any of the other commercial providers of bots. So he said a service designed to predict your actions that doesn't monetize that prediction is more trustworthy than the alternative. So Weavrs don't really do anything to help you. They entertain, and sometimes they inform, but they don't assist. And if you really want a bot over the long term, you really want a bot that can assist you. So I work in the cloud. I do, you know, service development and things like that. And one of the things that a lot of people in my sort of technological realm use is something called Hubot. So Hubot was developed by the guys at GitHub. The original developer was Cory Donahoe. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And Hubot lives in chat rooms. So most companies with distributed teams, they'll have a campfire or a chat room like that where everybody sits and, you know, you type in stuff and you share funny pictures, and when the service goes down, you all scream a lot. So Hubot lives in that chat room, and it's sort of available to anybody who wants to talk to it. So Cory and some of the GitHubbers actually figured out how to man-in-the-middle Siri so you could talk to Hubot via Siri. So you could say, Siri. So what Hubot's designed for, they use it for operations automation. So you can say, restart all my web servers. Hubot, restart all my web servers. And Hubot will go out and it will restart all your web servers. And then it will tell you, I restarted all your web servers. And you don't have to go out and SSH into all those boxes or connect all those machines because Hubot knows how to do that and it does it on your behalf. So they, they can log into Campfire or their specific app on their phone if they're sitting at the dinner table and the service goes down and be like, hey, reboot the web servers. This is what a Hubot chat room actually looks like. So you can say, like, image me robot that does like a Google image search and returns the first result. It does conversions and all sorts of sort of Google searchy things, but it's in your context. If you live in the chat room and you talk to other people in the chat room, you can talk to it. So I asked Corey what he thought about sort of the future of helpful bots, and he said, I think a lot of people will benefit from really understanding how stupid Hubot is. He's just a robot that talks to web services. I think the cool part is that people will begin to construct more and more useful pieces of software that can be combined to do really powerful things. Hubot was originally a teaching interface for operations tasks spread across many servers. What's great is that everyone has to run with it to dumb down mundane tasks and reduce risk by putting things behind HTTP APIs. Once your robot is capable of numerous tasks, he's an invaluable asset to your organization because he's pretty damn reliable and he's always online to help you out. So Hubot internally runs a collection of scripts. They're kind of like plugins. So you define a script and it has triggers in it. And it says, if any of these triggers happen, run me. So this is a script that pulls quotes from the TV show Archer. So whenever anybody types something into the chat room that includes the phrase login, Hubot will say, call Kenny Loggins because you're in the danger zone. So lots of uses of Hubot, aside from infrastructure automation, is people have used it to add that sort of bit of personality to their chat rooms, which is kind of interesting. And there's a whole Hubot scripts archive on GitHub of hundreds of scripts that you can download and install into your Hubot and add the feature. And interestingly enough, if you can tell Hubot, like, hey, say something from Archer, and it will go out and use a web crawler to pull down a random quote and say it for you. So it can interface with anything that has an API. So when we're talking about building a bot, if we want to avoid the vertical integration problem, so my bot is really great for booking me travel and nothing else. My bot is really great for scheduling calendar entries, but nothing else. We need some way to delegate responsibility when we start conversations with our bot. So we need something that's kind of like a tree, like a decision tree with a responsibility. So in Hubot, they have, look for this phrase. If you see this phrase, fire a response. And I would assume in Hubot, if you have multiple scripts that match the phrase, all of them run. In your own personal bot, you probably don't want 6 responses when you say, what time is it? If you have like 6 different things that think they can handle time. So when we sort of design that platform, we need a tree of responsibility. So you can say, I know how to do time. I can do time stuff. I can do calendar stuff. Later on, once the thing's been going for a while, people will say this sucks. And then you may have some system where plugins bid for, the ability to handle something. So it's like, I'm really confident and the user likes me a lot. Let me do this one. So the companies developing, commercial AI bots are undoubtedly handling this in an intelligent way, and we'll stumble by until we get something we like. So speaking of APIs and the ability to talk to APIs, Siri knows how to do stuff in your phone, right? Some stuff in your phone. It can, remind you. It can schedule something, or it can go out and talk to web services. But you have the entirety of the web at your disposal, so you can build software that talks to anything that is communicatable over the web. And you have, all of Wikipedia out there and what have you. There's a lot that a bot could do if you didn't think about, if you didn't limit it to your specific, area of interest. If lots of people could develop for a bot, you could have a very interesting bot because you would have the results of everybody's interest. So Twitter has a team that looks for bots. Somebody started a bot. Yesterday in the Bots for Civic Engagement panel, and it had been shut down in like 20 minutes. But it actually had like bot in the name. Facebook has to deal with bots, especially because of sort of weaponized bot platforms. Lots of people saying, "No, I like this person," or "Yes, I like this person." But there's an opportunity there because we're all sort of going to have bots eventually, probably. Some social network will embrace bots as first-class citizens. And they won't be side-by-side with people, but maybe it will be like when you add someone to your circles in Google+, you say, I want to add this person, and there's a checkbox that's like, and they're bots. So somebody brought up it was David, I think, in the Bots for Civic Engagement panel that in some South American countries, or the Dominican Republic or something like that, for $75,000 you can buy the right to vote. So there's some weird stuff there about bots as actually first-class citizens, but let's not go into that. So what kind of interfaces do you use to communicate with these kind of bots? So I think I like my cell phone. I don't trust my cell phone. I know people who lose their cell phone like every 3 days. I don't want my bot to live on my cell phone. I want my bot to appear on my cell phone, but I want my bot to live in the cloud, because the cloud is the logical place for my bot to live. Because it has fast internet connectivity to everything it needs, it's on all the time, somebody's monitoring it and making sure all that stuff still works. So head in the clouds, foot, feet on the ground. But it's going to be cross-screen, so if you have a display next to your door that shows you the weather and sort of has Google Now on it, like, hey, you should probably leave right now, your bot will appear there. Your bot will be on your cell phone. Your bot will be pushing you stuff in Google Glass. Your bot will be maybe sending your email, or you'll have a desktop thing or something. There's an interesting book by Daniel Suarez called Daemon that came out a couple of years ago. Sort of takes this to the logical extreme. It's about a software developer genius who he gets brain cancer, and approaching the end of his life, he decides to create this giant bot system. It uses news postings as its message bus, so it looks for keywords to show up in news posts. But it's this distributed bot system that interfaces with pretty much everything I think the author could come up with for a bot to interact with. But it's a really interesting, it's well written, and it's an interesting book, and all of the stuff in it is fairly plausible. And, kind of scary. It's a thriller. Check it out if you like that sort of thing. Bots will be also presenting off screens. This is Adafruit's Pi printer. There's a Raspberry Pi in there. It's a receipt printer, so it spits out stuff. Berg in London has their little printer. They've developed sort of a cloud message bus application platform for the little printer, so you can send messages from an application to a printer. The the Adafruit Pi printer is sort of made for hacking. And you also have things like Twilio and Tropo, where you can call in to talk to your bot, or your bot can call out. You can SMS your bot can SMS out. All of those things are possible. So this is a graphic that I created for a blog post about something that I called elder augmented reality. So we have lots of older people that young tech people have given iPads so that they can do video chat with them, because the iPad is way easier to use than the computer. And we have lots of people who have a lot of experience with things like, I was a plumber for 30 years. I worked in a bakery for 25 years, what have you. They're sort of sitting out there, and we're not taking advantage of that knowledge. So I had the idea that, in Google Glass 2.0, where you can actually video chat with someone live, or they can actually sort of draw on your screen, you could have a marketplace where people could post like, I'm available for $15 an hour, and I'll give you advice on baking. And you could, there's sort of interesting ramifications there. So you have if you're the older person, you have your iPad, and you sort of see what the person sees, and you can draw on it and be like, no, that you want this much butter. And, your bot will appear through the same sort of interface. Or your bots. And your bot will be location aware. Location is a really interesting thing. Lots of companies are working on the ability to sort of detect where you are and deal with the architecture of the spaces around you and detect like what's a surface and what's the building. Oh, you're standing here, so you're looking at this. So in Oxford, there's a place called the Turf Tavern. The Turf Tavern has been in Oxford for a very long time. It is right outside what used to be the city wall. Most famously, the Turf Tavern is the place where Bill Clinton did not inhale. But there's no sign for the Turf Tavern, except this, that somebody sort of scratched into a brick. You sort of have to wander down an alleyway, and then another alleyway, and another alleyway, and then there it is. But your bot can know these things, and it can sort of help to guide you and provide some context to what you're looking at. So we're going to have push and pull interactions with these things. So right now, when I talk to Siri, I talk to Siri. Siri doesn't talk to me. It may put alerts in my calendar, but it doesn't like spontaneously call me up and tell me something. But it could, and if it was a bot that was running autonomously all the time, it could. So I have a bot, a Weavr, that lives in Japan. I lived in Japan for like 2 years when I was really young, and I was, it would be really interesting if I dropped a bot that was interested in the stuff that I'm interested in, although maybe a bit more healthy, like hiking as opposed to sitting on the couch and watching TV, in the place where I lived for a while. That's sort of an interesting, my life didn't go this way kind of thing. And my Weavr, so one of the Weavr plugins, Weavrs is plugin based, they call them prosthetics, is the Dream prosthetic. And what the Dream prosthetic does is it does sort of a kaleidoscope effect on a picture that it saw that day from Flickr. So it will go around and look for geotagged pictures on Flickr during the day, and then at night it will pick one of them and do a kaleidoscope effect on it. And in Yokosuka, in the town in Japan where my Weavr lives, there's a military base. So most of the time, the dreams that your Weavrs have are kind of nightmarish because they're kaleidoscopes of things that they saw during the day. And I particularly got one that was, it was the bow of a ship, but it was like 4 times, and the guns were like projecting up. So it was a very interesting picture. So I can see in a future version, if the bot had the ability to sort of quantify how weird a picture was, that my bot could call me and be like, I just had this really weird dream. So what kind of environment are these bots going to live in? So everything now and in the next few years is going to be internet connected. I have a Nest thermostat in my house. I love my Nest thermostat. I no longer get off the couch to change the temperature. I feel kind of lazy about that, but it's an interface that works for me. You know, we're going to have Internet of doorknobs and what have you. So your bot, all of these things talk to APIs. They make API requests. They connect over the net. And because they're internet native, your bot can talk to them, or they can talk to your bot. The thermostat that I replaced my Nest with at my house was probably shipped with the house in the 70s. That's a long time, and there aren't a whole lot of tech companies that have existed for that long. And as much as I love my Nest, I don't think Nest is going to be around forever. And a lot of the functionality that I get from my Nest, I get because it's an API-enabled service that lives out there in the cloud that, you know, intercepts the connection for my request to change the temperature. So what happens when Nest goes away? What happens when Chumby goes away or Gowalla goes away? If your bot is the center of, or your bot's platform is the center of your internet-connected thing, that is a little less scary because you can maintain it yourself. So I talked about how I thought these bot platforms were going to be plugin based. Nobody can create the whole thing. You can focus on a vertical though, so you can. So let's call it like WordPress. I like WordPress as an example. You can create a plugin that does cooking and just does cooking. Like, this is what taking a cooking class for like 3 days could teach you. Like, I'm gonna give you that much information. Like, salted and unsalted butter are different because if you leave unsalted butter on your counter, it will spoil. Having that kind of information in a vertical that your bot can tell you, you know, somebody could do that. That's a solvable chunk of information. The problem with WordPress is everything for WordPress has to pretty much be written in PHP because that's how WordPress is architected. Fortunately, the side effect of having the cloud and wanting enterprises to develop stuff on the cloud is we've gotten pretty good at developing platforms that run different kinds of code inside them. So one in particular is called Cloud Foundry. Cloud Foundry is a platform as a service in a box. So you can run Java applications on it, you can run Python applications on it, you can run PHP applications on it. And I think a bot platform will be a lot like that because you want to invite everybody to the party. And you don't necessarily trust the plugin that you've got because trust is, you know, sort of a core problem that we're dealing with. But you could talk to that plugin via, you know, JSON API communication, and that would be okay. And then you'd have a web UI sort of to your cloud of applications that would be, you know, optimized for mobile or desktop or what have you. And you'd have an API endpoint, so other things could talk to it. In the galaxy of WordPress plugins, you will find a reasonable number of them that give you extra services that you have to pay for. And there are lots of things that your bot can't necessarily do itself. In this case, this is a video transcoding plugin for WordPress. So, you know, lots of VMs could do video transcoding. Video transcoding is kind of a pain in the rear. So I'd really rather have somebody else do that for me. But the idea here is that I pay for the processing, but I own the data. And I own the data at rest. So you gave me the value when you transcoded the thing, but it's my data and I get to keep it. Sort of a core concept of the cloud. And now we have API marketplaces. Startups come and go. Lots of times they come and go really fast. I was looking at, you know, pictures that I took at South by Southwest in 2001, and I don't think any of those companies still exist. But lots of them tackle similar problems. So, you know, if you want to do video transcoding, there are a number of services that will offer that for you. So a nice thing is you can abstract that problem. You can say, I just need somebody who does transcoding of video. And if everybody sort of comes up with a similar API, then you can migrate without breaking your thing. So this is Mashape. The downside of APIs that you pay for is usually you have to sign up for them, give them your credit card information. That's kind of a pain in the rear. They want to make sure that you can pay for your service that you get. I think the most interesting one on this slide is Chatterbox, which does sentiment analysis for social media. I mean, there are some interesting, implications of running that against the stuff that your friends post and having like a thermometer of how happy your friend network is. And it probably wouldn't be very expensive because they're probably optimized for enterprise. But it gives you the ability to migrate. So Mashape in particular is a marketplace. So you pay them and they pay the people who supply the APIs. But that means that I only need one account to use all of these APIs. They sort of vouch for me that I will be able to pay if somebody transcodes a video or what have you. So because they're in the cloud, because they're living in the cloud, they have access to all of the stuff that us enterprise companies are coming up with. Like, it's hard to come up with problems that you need cloud resources for, but before long, we will have big data of ourselves, and suddenly running a Hadoop analysis on my data becomes like a real thing that I could do and get some value out of. And because they're cloud native, they can migrate and optimize themselves. So we don't really care what cloud we're running on, as long as the cloud is good and cheap. So if Amazon drops their prices, or if Rackspace drops their prices, and if the pain to migrate is less than the price savings, then maybe my bot will move, and maybe it won't even tell me. So once there's more than one of these cloud native bots out there, it makes sense for them to talk to each other. So this gets into what most people are calling the personal cloud. So I thought I was really smart, like 6 months ago, less. I wrote a blog post about the personal cloud computer. So I was like, when you have a desktop PC, you control the hardware, you theoretically own the software, and you own the data. With mobile, you don't really own the hardware, you don't really own the software, and they can take the data away from you. The thing that led to a lot of our generation getting into technology was the ability to run code for yourself. So the idea that you could have a computer in the cloud that was yours that you could run stuff on, that's sort of interesting because it can scale out as much as it needs to. You don't have to be limited by the size of your hard drive or whatever. And then somebody posted on the blog that was like, wow, this is really like our white paper that we posted 6 months ago. And sure enough, it was exactly like their white paper that they posted 6 months ago. So this is a company called Kinetics. They're working on a personal cloud platform. They call it their personal event network. The idea being that all of your stuff that's internet enabled can talk to it. So like, I have a Wi-Fi enabled scale at home. It can connect via API to anything built for it, or it could, theoretically natively talk to this thing. And it could store my data there, and it would be my, my storage and control point. One thing that they're playing with is they're using the personal cloud as an interface to run applications. Like here, they're playing with light control. And because you have this sort of one central point of control that's yours, where you can audit things and you can provide authorization to connections to things. Aaron Cope, who's now at the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum in New York, formerly of Flickr, has a really good keynote talk that he gave. It's titled Time Pixels, but he covers like enough stuff for like 10 talks in it. But one of the things that he's developed is something called Parallel Flickr. So what Parallel Flickr does is it grabs all of your photos from Flickr and all of the public photos of your direct contacts, with the idea that if in the end Flickr goes away, you could reconstruct at least part of Flickr based on the stuff that everybody has who's running parallel Flickr. He has another one for Foursquare where he has the ability to check in, but keep the check-in private. So like, I want a log of everywhere I've been. I like Foursquare. I don't want to always post my location publicly on Foursquare. So I have the ability to, not allow that. So I was thinking about this yesterday. I was sitting in a panel with David, and it came to me, this is like the API of me. So you guys can repurpose that and call it your own if you would like. So more and more startups are appearing that give you the ability to bridge the gap between the digital and the real. And that gives you an interesting new set of potential features for your bot. There's Mechanical Turk that lets you divvy up a task and have a bunch of people work on it. There's a service called Odesk that lets you use international contractors to work on something. TaskRabbit has an API, so you can post tasks to TaskRabbit. You can accept somebody's bid to do a task, like do this errand for me. Shapeways just introduced their API, so you can get 3D printed things delivered to your doorstep or someone else's doorstep based on what your bot thinks or the data that it comes up with. And there are a bunch of print-on-demand APIs as well. So experience aspiration. So these things have existed before. We called them, executive assistants or personal assistants. And we can look at that model and say, what was great about that experience? I mean, the thing knew stuff about you. So it could be your second brain, or, in the case of some executives, like the first brain. The Jarvis to your Tony Stark, that sort of thing. If any of you have kids, you watch Adventure Time. So there's Finn, the last human on Earth, and his buddy is Jake, the dog that has, strange abilities to stretch and knows more about the world than he does. And, if you're into the fantasy thing, sort of the idea of the familiar that goes along with the wizard and, isn't necessarily super intelligent but does provide value. But this is kind of daunting. But really what we need something that's just good enough. Like, it needs to provide enough value that someone will install it. It doesn't need to be everything to everybody at the start, but we need something that's a good starting point for at least the early adopters. So that's pretty much a wrap. I wanted to show this one last slide. So this is Netscape 0.93 beta. I don't know how long many of you have been online, but this was the version before the first version that I used. And it was, there wasn't a lot there. There's no JavaScript. That didn't come till Netscape 2. You can't change font colors. No animated GIFs. No, funny cat GIFs. But there's something there, and everybody saw, wow, this is, there's something here. There's something that's going to get better eventually. And I think
that was actually the nice one.
Because
Netscape was a fancy one.
As opposed to like iCab and
No, there was another one before it.
like Mosaic. Yeah, NCSA Mosaic. Yeah, so I actually bought a computer so I could run Netscape, because the computer that I had didn't have a math coprocessor in it, so it wouldn't run Netscape. Yeah, so things will get better, but we got to start somewhere. So the links to all the stuff that I talked about are up on jeffkramer.com. If you like the talk, that is where the survey is. You can also get a link to it if you have the iPhone app in the panel listing. I would love to hear your feedback. There are a couple more articles. There's a really good one on developing Python-based Twitter bots if you're looking for a place to start. So yeah, I guess we have 10 minutes for questions. There's a microphone in the center of the room. I think they're recording this for podcasting. So.
Great talk, Jeff. I have one question about security.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I have a bot, how do I specify what my bot can do? Are there any open standards that would allow me to specify the resources, the things that my bot has available to it, and then also the permissions for, what can my bot do, how do I revoke that permission, and how do I delegate my permissions to different kinds of bots?
Right. So this is a problem that we deal with in the enterprise space a lot. Because we have, here's a project, and I only want the code committers to have the ability to start new servers, not shut down current servers and things like that. I think once people start creating, so I don't know of any open standards to do that right now. Potentially the logical place for that is if you manage API. So I think your bot will probably be more of your buddy than the rest of the internet will, because implicitly you will trust it a bit more, because it will be open source and you'll be able to look at what it's doing. But if you're going through like a Mashape, like API marketplace, potentially there is a choke point for you have access to like create API methods but not destroy API methods. That's sort of a logical choke point, I think, if you don't do that management inside of the bot itself. I think that was everything. David?
That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks for mentioning. It's good points about trust. I guess they would consider information in. Ask the work who you trusted in, who you like to be able to trust. Have you got any thoughts about what the future plan needs to be to create personal bots? Is it going to be an open source community thing, maybe with different governments? Or do you think it needs to be commercial? Weavrs is commercial, but APIs there, what sort of comments going on?
Right. So the one slide that I skipped in my presentation is, I think, the best model, I think, for this is like WordPress, where they host WordPress and they provide a lot of value-added services, and I like them, and they provide a lot of plug-in services for standalone installs that I can either pay for or not, and they keep generating revenue, and they have a benevolent dictator, and I sort of know that it's in good hands, but it's open source, so I know somebody could fork it if, if Matt sells Automatic to Oracle or what have you. So I think it's going to be like that. I think it's going to be a software stack that you install. There's going to be a marketplace of stuff that you can get from, either pay for the app or pay for API access that the app or that a plugin does. But yeah, I think it has to be fundamentally open source, or otherwise adoption is going to be impossible. Honoria?
Well, thanks. I really appreciate this, because now my mind's going crazy, because I want a Weaver to dream the things that I'm going to teach the next day in class, and to deliver like some, recent examples that I can share with my students. And it just sounds like a perfect teaching tool. And I was just at South by Southwest EDU, and nobody mentioned this at all, and I've never heard that. I just came here because I know you, and I knew I would also learn something. And so where would I go now to get me a teaching Weaver helper bot?
So you can talk to David.
Right.
David runs the platform. You can go to weavrs.com, and you basically log in with Google, and then you say create new Weaver. Yeah, and they have options on like where they live, and yeah, let me. Yeah, so this is my wife's Weaver. It lives in Amsterdam. We traveled to Amsterdam, and we were like, wow, Amsterdam is really awesome. And so when my wife was creating a Weaver, she was like, a Weaver around here isn't as interesting, but a Weaver, the place I would like to live, is interesting. And, especially if you're doing stuff where it's like there's a really interesting artistic movement happening in this place, then Weavers can come up with interesting stuff. Yeah.
One more question. my company uses this platform called Puppet,
Yeah.
and Puppet has a management system for a network of distributed agents or bots
Right.
that live on each server that we manage. And can you talk about also more of what more can we expect in terms of trends with networks and agents actually going into progress?
So I have this problem at HP because I work with HP software sometimes on the new stuff that I'm working on, and I like to call my thing agents because they're intelligent agents. And when they think agents, they think this is a software thing that I installed on a server that does backups. It's like a backup agent or what have you. In the Puppet example, maybe somebody will build like an add-on for Puppet that like on your big knock breakdown, you can like see how happy your Puppet install is. I'm not sure what the advantage there is for having emotional storytelling. Yeah, we use Chef at HP Cloud. They could use a lot more personality.
I guess I'm wondering, like, if I have a CGI program on a web server, that thing's kind of sitting there waiting so what's the differentiation between a bot and, a service?
So it may be easier to talk about like an Internet of Things example. So the way the Nest works, for instance, is the Nest has software on it that connects, that runs all the time, that's its UI and whatnot, that connects to Nest Central via a like JSON probably based long-running socket connection. So it sits there and listens all the time. So I have the app on my phone. When I run the app, my Nest probably pushes up updates occasionally, like it is currently this many degrees, the humidity is this. And it probably pulls down things like, what's the temperature going to be today? So it can, do things proactively, like I'm going to lower the temperature now, and that way we won't have to spend as much energy in the future. So, I mean, the really interesting point there is where it all connects. Because that's the thing that if it goes away, the whole system breaks. I could replace my Nest thermostat with the next thing, but my Nest is collecting all of the data. I'm having a hard time answering your question.
I think I have the answer to my own question.
Okay.
I was thinking, well, it goes back to your first slide, which is what is the definition of AI? And it's sort of that it reacts to your environment. And the CGI script doesn't go out there and pull. It's really waiting for it to be called. Whereas the kinetics framework that you described is more a way of programming reactions to events that could be based upon observations. So I think it really goes back to your original slide.
Yeah.
I agree with you that I think that when I asked, I went to Cloud Identity Meetup and I asked people how they thought they'd be using agents in the future, I got back a lot of blank stares, but it seemed to me that there would be a number of agents that we'd be using to increase our productivity online. My main question is about authorization. If I authorize agents to act on my behalf, how do I curtail them if they start doing things that I don't want? And how can I move the policies between potentially agent providers so that I'm not locked into certain models?
Right. So with Weavrs, you create a Weaver, you have no direct control over the Weaver after you create it, aside from adding new emotions and changing tags. So if you have social network adoption of something, like if you have a social network where your bot lives alongside you or your bots live alongside you and somebody can go to your profile and they can see, oh, here's his calendar bot. If I want to schedule an appointment for him, I should talk to that thing because it has access to his calendar and I don't. So your bot sort of becomes that authorization point for you. So Weavers post a lot of content. They post tweets, they post blog posts, they post pictures. I don't think most people's bots will do that, because if they do, that will become the internet apocalypse nightmare. So, yeah.
I'll further refine it a little bit, which is that when we're talking about public data on Twitter, I think that the authorization decisions are fairly easy. I'm taking public data in and I'm sharing it publicly. But if my bots are looking at my private data, for example, my bank account or my pictures or something that I can't share publicly, then I think that it becomes more important to be able to specify the content and the recipient. And if my agent is going to act on my behalf, that we've sort of gone from the realm of what's possible now to what's not possible, I think.
Yeah. So there was a presentation yesterday. This is going to be the last thing, and I'll wrap up because we're over time. There was a presentation yesterday about AI in things, and one of the companies that talked was Zopni, which is like inbox spelled backwards. So they do address book stuff, and they have contextual knowledge about the people that you have talked to. So they can say, so your normal address book is 150K or so. Their normal address book data set is like 60 meg. So it's like everybody you've ever called, everybody you've ever gotten an email from, all of that stuff. So they can look at it, and their thing is kind of essentially a bot platform, but it lays on top of other stuff. And they can say, this probably is this person, and you probably want to talk to them. So I think bots will be designed to be more assistive than they will be. Yeah, I think there will be a stop button on your bot plugin, because sometimes it's just going to go crazy, but most of the time it's going to be there to help you out. So thank you all for coming.